Welcome, everybody. I'm Christopher O'Connor, the Program Officer for West Africa here at the National Endowment for Democracy. On behalf of NED's International Forum for Democratic Studies, I am pleased to welcome everybody to today's presentation, Decaying Institutions, How Corruption Undermines Democracy in Nigeria, featuring Reagan-Fascell Democracy Fellow, Oludotun Babayemi, known as Olu. We are also delighted to have with us, as a discussant, Debra LaPrevotte, Senior Investigator at the Century. Funded by the U.S. Congress, the Reagan-Fascell Democracy Fellow Program hosts some of the world's most dedicated democracy activists, scholars, and journalists to conduct independent research and pursue projects here at NED. Now in its 17th year, the program has hosted more than 260 fellows from over 90 countries. Within this remarkable group, our speaker today stands out for unwavering commitment to advancing democracy and government accountability in Nigeria. In 2015, Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari was elected by citizens inspired by his assurances to fight corruption, and his government has since taken steps to keep this promise. Initiatives include strengthening anti-corruption institutions, implementing fiscal reforms, and joining the Open Government Partnership. However, the initial excitement is turning into disenchantment as Nigerian voters realize that despite Buhari's good intentions, corruption remains deeply entrenched in Nigeria. Recent state and parliamentary elections have witnessed low voter turnout, while public trust in politicians and the state continues to decline. In his presentation, Olu will examine how the structure of Nigeria's political institutions perpetuates corrupt practices. He will also offer recommendations on how both democratic organizations and international funders can tackle corruption, including through the use of citizen-led initiatives such as Follow the Money. Debra LaPrevotte will offer comments. Olu is co-founder of Connected Development, Code, an Abuja-based organization that uses online and offline tools to promote accountability and transparency in Nigeria. Through Code's Follow the Money project, he and his team advocate for and track the disbursement of funds for local communities. Mr. Babayemi is also lead development consultant with Clone House Nigeria, an organization that offers training and consultancy services on monitoring and evaluation to state and non-state actors. As a data fellow with Open Knowledge Foundation School since 2014, he has trained over 600 journalists and nonprofit leaders on how to use available data to ensure transparency and accountability. From 2009 to 2014, he served as country director of the World Wildlife Fund's Earth Hour project in Nigeria. During his fellowship, Mr. Babayemi has written a handbook on the potential of digital technologies to promote citizen engagement in democratic accountability. He intends to circulate his findings via blog posts, press releases, and newspapers in conjunction with a network of journalists in West Africa. Debra LaPrevotte is a senior investigator for the Century, which seeks to disrupt and ultimately dismantle the network of perpetrators, facilitators, and enablers who fund and profit from Africa's deadliest conflicts. Prior to joining the Century, Ms. LaPrevotte retired after 20 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She served as a supervisory special agent on the International Corruption Unit at FBI headquarters. She also was instrumental in the initial FBI's kleptocracy program and seized more than $1 billion from foreign corrupt officials. She has spent the past 16 years working on international corruption investigations. She is also a forensic scientist and spent several years on the FBI's Evidence Response Team unit at the FBI lab. She has an undergraduate degree from George Mason University and a master's degree in forensic science from George Washington University. We will now turn the floor over to Olu, who will speak for approximately 25 minutes, followed by Debbie for about 10 minutes. We will have plenty of time for questions following their presentations. Before we get there, though, for those on Twitter, you can also follow this presentation and contribute to the conversation using the hashtag NEDevents, or by following the forum at Think Democracy and the Endowment at NEDemocracy. If you have not already done so, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. Finally, let me take this opportunity to thank the many staff members involved in this event, and most especially the research associate Kabod Mensah, who has offered vital assistance to the Fellows Project and today's presentation. Olu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much to the NED family for giving me this opportunity to discuss this very salient issue in the most populated country in Africa. That's Nigeria. And thank you all for being part of this event. 25 years ago, my father used to tell me to follow him to the village, and he calls it the real Nigeria. Well, I do actually ask him, you mean the village is the real Nigeria? And he said, yes, you need to go. What actually fascinates me whenever we're in the village and going through the village is that I actually find ill-equipped health facilities and also dilapidated health centers. But in front of these facilities, you actually see a signpost that has a structural adjustment program funded by the World Bank or by the European Union. And I always ask him that, what's happening to these people if there are funds meant for this? And he told me, son, you're going to grow up and become privileged, and I think you can answer those questions for yourself. In the past 18 years, during the new wave of democracy in Nigeria, every president, 4 of them that has been elected, has actually promised to either tackle corruption, fight corruption, and some even say they will run down corruption. However, Transparency International, an organization that ranks countries in terms of corruption, still ranks Nigeria 136 out of 176 in their last ranking in 2016. It has averaged 130 in the last 9 years. According to a report by Afrobarometer, which did a survey of Africans, Nigerians were more of the respondents that said corruption was not reducing, that corruption is increasing. It is based on this that I would like to pivot on this point. So, one is that we need to strengthen oversights on each tier of government in Nigeria, from the federal to the state to the local governments. We need to remove immunity, which our political office holders enjoy. We also need to allocate more resources to the local government through the state. The federal government is overburdened. We need to reduce the cost on our political office holders. And most importantly, we need to increase citizen education, which is going to be mass, and also strengthen citizens' voice themselves. Nigeria exists as a federal republic, and according to the 1999 Constitution, power has been separated among the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. Also, it has 3 tiers of government: the federal government, and also you have 36 state governments, plus the Federal Capital Territory, and you have 774 local governments. All these tiers of government actually agreed on a resource pool to be shared in a format where the federal government takes 52% and the state and local government shares the remaining amount of money. However, oversight remains weak and also inexistent in all these tiers of government. So, on paper, in reality, during federal allocation, money given to the state is supposed to be shared in this particular format. But in reality, what we see is that the federal allocation from the federal government goes into the purse of the state government, which has only the authority of the governor, who decides on whatever the funds will be meant for. You would wonder also that the constitution of the country actually grants the responsibility of providing basic services such as health, water, education to the local government. So even though the local government has all this on the budget, a governor sitting at the state decide on wherever this money would have to go to. And what this has caused is that you have several governors being in charge of this money, and they stash millions of dollars, millions of pounds in the US, in the UK, and in some other countries. Not only that, presently, the Economic, Financial and Crimes Commission is probing about 13 past governors. Sahara Reporters, a popular online media organization in Nigeria, based in New York, call those people dealers and not leaders. And one way they have actually found in escaping being tried by the Economic, Financial and Crimes Commission is to also, after their tenure as the governor of the states, is also to contest in the National Assembly as a senator or as an House of Representative member. In 2016, I evaluated a project that was supposed to provide water points for 500 communities in 5 different states in Nigeria. So this project was was supposed to be between 2010 and 2015. What we found out was that only half of those water points were actually installed. What were the common themes when we asked the Water Local Agency? It is that the governor did not provide the funds for them to install the water points. Not only that, there was even when the funds were provided, there were no proper financial controls at all. We couldn't even see where funds were coming from and where it came, as a bank transfer or whatever. So some of them were just via mere conversation that you see in relationship between the local water agency and the governor. In 2016, the federal government of Nigeria provided about 1.8 billion for 35 states as a bailout fund to these states. Follow the money, a project of connected development which I founded in 2012, and a network of about 1,200 people wanted to track how the government of Delta states, Adamawa states, and Gombe State will actually spend that money. We wrote a Freedom of Information Act back letter to the governor of Delta State, and he responded and said, well, my state is not bound by the Freedom of Information Act, so I cannot provide you the information you're looking for. Same thing with the government of Adamawa as well, although it was different for Gombe State, where they proposed to use $30 out of the money to provide education facility for school children learning under trees. What we did was to, one, do several town hall meetings, which is a core part of what we do, is a form of educating the citizens in their community, and also bringing together the politicians that are involved, the beneficiaries, and also the media. In one of the town hall meetings, one of the politicians there said, our community reporter from that community is from an opposition political party. So that's why he's organizing this. And he said he should never try that. What we did, we always have a weekly Follow the Money radio program where we name, shame, if you like, and talk about these campaigns. We mentioned the name of the politician. Just 2 weeks after the first program, the headmaster of the school called us and said he just saw a consultant come into the school, and he said he wants to start work. These are just a few of the kind of stories you hear. In June 2016, Doctors Without Borders, an humanitarian emergency agency, said 49,000 children needed urgent treatment and they were actually malnourished. What was the response of the government? The response was that we're going to raise a committee, and the committee will look into the humanitarian emergency case. You would wonder, who is the state agency responsible for this? The National Emergency Management Agency. In a presentation in 2012 in Nairobi, where I was evaluating 3 countries that have been with the United Nations Technical Advisory Mission, I mentioned that it is actually the character of the people working in these agencies. Most of them were friends of politicians. Most of them were friends to their political parties, and so they would not deliver. And even if you have those that want to deliver, they won't provide proper tools for them. What the Follow the Money team did was to write a Freedom of Information back letter to the National Emergency Management Agency to request for how much they've gotten from the government for working in the northeastern part for 3 years before this release was. We didn't get any response from them. What we did was to research on all the data that has gone into the Northeast and provide it as this illustration. We published it on Facebook, on Twitter, gave it to several radio stations, shared it with our team in Borno State as well. 1 week after this, the National Emergency Management Agency went on Twitter and started tweeting all what they've gotten and all what they've given to the northeastern part of the country. Not only that, just 2 weeks after we published this, there was a protest in Borno State asking the governor on how much he has gotten from the federal government. Although the government again responded that they're going to investigate, but actually it took 1 year and 6 months to confirm that the Secretary General of the Federation, who was in charge, who the National Emergency Management Agency is underneath in Nigeria, was the one that stole several millions of dollars that was meant for the northeastern part. I think 1 week ago, it came on the news again, like he was arrested by the Economic, Financial, and Crimes Commission. So if democracy provides political orders to have a social contract with citizens that do bring them to power, that do vote for them, I think for political orders, it should be a sacrifice for them, for the people they govern. If you look at the amount of money that is being paid to our lawmakers, let us look at the federal lawmakers alone. In Nigeria, you have 106 senators and 360 House of Representative members as federal lawmakers. According to Quartz Africa, the amount we spend on each federal lawmaker is $540,000 US. You would wonder, in a country where the gross domestic product per capita is just way below $2,500, taxpayers' money are being spent this way. But that's not even the issue. How much is $540,000 itself? $540,000 can actually provide 190 water points in 190 communities. The National Bureau of Statistics in 2014 published that Nigeria has 540,000 basic education teachers. 540,000 US dollars would have been used to train half of those teachers by the time the Sustainable Development Goals will end. There are implications for this for democracy. According to the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report, it ranked Nigeria 130 amongst 137 countries on citizens' trust on political orders. I mean, this is actually leading to low turnout of voters, and you could see that in the last Anambra governor elections, where fewer of those that registered to vote came to vote. So people are like, so I pay tax to my government, but I do not get anything for it. I look for my water, I pay for my power, education facilities are nothing to write home about. So why should I always continue to vote? On the other hand, the politicians leverage on that and think of providing what we call in Nigeria stomach infrastructure, which is the provision of bags of rice, and even at times they buy votes for less than $5. So, I mean, saying that they will meet the immediate needs of citizens for them to come out and vote for them. In a country where unemployment is so high, what do you expect? A Nigerian would want to work in the government or become an SA because he knows that is where he can easily get money. So most people would rather want to become a local government chairman or contest for the National House of Rep or the State House of Rep, even without having knowledge of what governance really is. When we founded Connected Development in 2012, when about 1,500 children, lead-poisoned children, needed about $2 million to clean up their community, and the money didn't come, and even when it was announced by the government that, oh, they've released the money, but it didn't reach the community, what we wanted to do was to have two strategies. Go on ground into the community. This time, then it was Bagega and Zamfara states. Make sure we go on ground, mobilize the communities, and also be able to bring together the government officials that are responsible for the money, the beneficiaries as well, and the media. This became a key part of the work that we do. And also, for the past 4 months that I've been the National Endowment for Democracy, I've been researching civil society organizations that uses technology to promote transparency and accountability. The report of the book, if you want it, you can request via that link. Also, one of the key success stories of these civil society organizations that I looked into, 23 of them work in 10 countries, case studies from 9 different NGOs working in 4 different countries. The key theme that their success stories inked on was the provision of a space whereby you can have political office holders and citizens coming together to talk about these issues. So I would recommend that we support these kind of programs for us to entrench democracy. Also, the Follow the Money team, between June 2016 and December 2017, we wrote 101 Freedom of Information letters, 26 to to federal government agencies, and about 73 to state government agencies. We got response from the federal government agencies, 9 of them, while we got only 10 from the state agencies. And you will be surprised that 4 of the response that we got from state agencies were from Kaduna State. Kaduna State is one of the states that has written a letter of intent to the Open Government Partnership. So I think we need to, in a grant conditions for all the states, because we found out that most partners now are looking to go local. So they go to the subnational. I think we should improve on our grant conditions, and which is what you see. And one way we can look at it is, making sure that they implement the federal, they respond to some of the FOI letters that have been sent out. There's the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007, which no government at all, no state government implements, except for Kaduna State, which started 2 years ago. There's the Open Government Partnership, which the present government had signed into as well. I think we can leverage on this to provide grant conditions for the state governments. I think it is not enough for us to come on here after 3 years the governor had finished his term and say that, oh, millions of dollars has been stashed away in the US, in Canada, in the UK. I think we should become proactive and create communication networks where you have organizations working on kleptocracy, tracking spending, financial flow, and you have in-country civil society organizations in a network. There could be a network, a framework that can create that. At Follow the Money, we've created a platform called ifollowthemoney.org. Presently, there are 1,300 plus members on this platform from the 36 states in Nigeria and also from 5 other West African countries running Follow the Money. I think this could be an example of how we can also get other international partners join into it, and we can always communicate. For instance, when the 1.8 billion bailout funds was sent to the state governments, we could actually start communicating based on that within this network and say, oh, where is the state's money going? Not only that, what is it being used for as well? I think this makes us become much more proactive. In my handbook, I surveyed 23 civil society organizations working on promoting accountability in West Africa. And I asked which tool is the most effective in mobilizing citizens and also in getting government response, thereby promoting transparency and accountability. Radio came first. Second was TV. In essence, what this means is that we need to start mobilizing more. Support programs that allow CSOs to collaborate with independent media organizations. At Follow the Money, with our Follow the Money program on radio, we partner with independent traditional media organizations in local languages. Our radio programs are in local languages, and I think we can use this method to increase citizen education in these various communities. Lastly, I would want to conclude with this quote by my most respected Nigerian, though not my father, but Chinua Achebe, who said a functioning, robust democracy requires a healthy, educated, participatory followership and an educated, morally grounded leadership as well. I look forward to your suggestions and comments. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Olu, very much for your amazing presentation. Debbie, the floor is yours.
That's your first mistake, giving me a microphone. As mentioned earlier, I spent the last 20 years with the FBI investigating international corruption, and a great deal of that time was spent working in Nigerian corruption and working with the EFCC in Nigeria. And that we were very fortunate that the United States had the opportunity and the venue to go after millions of dollars that was stolen by Sani Abacha when he was president. And we were, the U.S. was fortunate to have seized and restrained $630 million of funds that were stolen by the Abacha family. And then on from there, under Goodluck Jonathan, looking at Dinzani Alison Madueke, the Minister of Petroleum. And of course, during the Goodluck Jonathan presidency, very little assistance was being provided from the government of Nigeria to help foreign partners go after corruption proceeds. We all were extremely thrilled when President Buhari took office because he did campaign on an anti-corruption platform. And where I certainly applaud his efforts, so much more could be done. And that is the biggest frustration, I think. Recently, in the last year or so, charges have been brought against Patience Jonathan. Funds have been seized that are associated with her, between $20 and $50 million, as well as one of the cousins of Goodluck Jonathan. But immediately after Buhari taking office, one of my questions was, okay, who are the targets from the last regime? You know, over the last 8 years, in excess of several $1 billion left Nigeria. And the majority of that money left in US dollars, which gives the United States the opportunity to assist Nigeria with going after those funds. A lot has been written about the amount of money that was offshored in the UAE. And in the 4 or 5 months leading up to Buhari taking office, one of the airports in Abuja was called the Money Port. And private jets were taking off daily and flying to the UAE. So we know that dozens of properties have been purchased in Dubai and Abu Dhabi by Nigerian officials, and that millions, if not billions, in dollars in cash, which were flown in, are being stored in banks in the UAE. So I know that a cooperation agreement has been signed between President Buhari and the UAE premier. But it's also my understanding that the basis of that agreement is, if you find it, we'll help you seize it, but we won't help you look. And I'd be very happy to be told otherwise, but that's my understanding. So there are ways that the United States, the UK and Canada, and Germany and other foreign partners, Switzerland of course, can help Nigeria try to identify more assets that should be repatriated back to Nigeria. And as someone who seized hundreds of millions of dollars in cooperation with the government of Nigeria, our biggest concern is that there is a level of transparency when those funds are returned, so that they just literally don't disappear again. I helped recover millions of dollars for Ukraine, and when we sat down with Ukraine, I think the State Department said there will be multiple layers of transparency as to the disbursement of these funds. And it was a very diplomatic way of saying, you need to account for every dollar we return. Because and my biggest push as the person who would spend 7 years of their life tracking down the money, getting the evidence to support it, writing a lis pendens, going to court, I wanted to see that there was a recognizable benefit to the people of Nigeria. That they could look and say, okay, Switzerland, you have repatriated $723 million to Nigeria that was related to the Abacha family. Can Nigeria account for every penny? Yes, like Olu was talking, how many water points have been put in because of the money that was returned? How many people have fed? How much medicine was bought? How much infrastructure was done? How much education? I mean, you got $723 million that originally should have gone to all of these infrastructure and running the government. Is the money accounted for so that the people of Nigeria are seen as the victim? So is there transparency in the funds that are returned? I would recommend that Nigeria continue to work with its foreign partners, the US, UK, Germany, Switzerland, Canada. There are still investigative, I think Abacha had been dead for 5 years when I got the case. So time's not that big of a factor in trying to trace down these assets. And I just think there is aggressive techniques that could be used by the government of Nigeria to continue to follow the money. That's why I love Olu's efforts so much, because when I teach internationally about how to fight corruption, the first thing I tell everybody is it's always about the money. It's always, always been all about the money. With the exception, I think, of child pornography and murder, every other crime is done for profit. And so even FBI agents, I'm like, well, you're following the money. And they're so busy getting the evidence of the crime, they're not following the money. I said, drug dealers don't sell drugs because they love selling drugs. They want to drive a hoopty ride, they want a Rolex watch, they want a Cadillac Escalade, they want a lifestyle they cannot afford. Well, the same thing occurs to every governor and politician and military leader and senior cabinet member in Nigeria. They want a lifestyle that they cannot otherwise afford, which means buying bling. That means they're buying jewelry. I think millions of dollars of Madueke's jewelry was located in Nigeria after her arrest. Dinzani Alison Madueke and 4 other associates were arrested in the UK. Nigeria's foreign partners are very amenable to working with Nigeria to go after the proceeds of foreign corruption in their own countries and repatriating it back to Nigeria, as long as we repatriate it back in a way that there is transparency. So, I look at the efforts that Olu does, and it all comes down to, I hate to say, naming and shaming. And it is. It's like, it is exposing corruption, and through exposing corruption and shining a very bright light on it, making people responsible for their actions, and ultimately, I saw on the headline that you put up on Abori that he may not have to pay back $50 million. Why? He was prosecuted in London, in the UK. Where is his money today? Is there a possibility of going after it? What assets does he still owe? And why isn't Nigeria, he's already been convicted of money laundering. He's admitted to it. Why isn't his money being forfeited and returned to the coffers from which it was stolen? So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you both very much for your presentations and your comments. Olu, I think you did a phenomenal job at really explaining sort of the structures, the overview of corruption in Nigeria, providing your personal experience in terms of why you are in the line of work that you are, and providing really some concrete examples of how civil society can continue to work on these issues and to promote reform. Debbie, thank you very much for sharing your international perspective. I think it's I'm sure that Nigerian civil society, the Nigerian public, is very appreciative of the international cooperation that they are getting. And I think that hopefully that's an area that we see increased collaboration from the Nigerian government and Nigerian civil society on in the coming years. In a moment, I will open it up for questions from the audience. At that time, I'd ask that people clearly state their name and their affiliation before asking their question. I would also ask that people keep it fairly brief so that we can get in as many questions for Olu and Debbie as possible. But before turning it over to the audience, I would like to ask both of you one question just to kick things off. Olu, so I noticed that obviously in your presentation, you highlight state governments and in particular governors as really a focal point of corruption in the Nigerian system. At the same time, you also really highlight the power of state governors, their autonomy, and their ability to an extent, to circumvent the law. A lot of the work that Code, that Follow the Money, has been doing is focused more at the local and state government level. So I'd be interested if you can provide more details on how you've been able to pressure state governments to reform, particularly understanding that state governments at times can block some of the federal reforms that are there.
Thank you. In 2017, what we worked on 31 campaigns in 31 communities, and this were all in 17 states. We had just 13 successful campaigns in which, perhaps water was provided, an education facility was refurbished, and that. So, but out of these 13, 5 of it were in Kaduna State. So, and remember in my presentation, I mentioned that Kaduna State is one of the states that had written a letter of intent to the OGP headquarters. So, the way we approach, it's been so difficult to approach the state. Looking back, the federal government has become open much more than the state government. We have challenges of them, the major challenge is them responding to some of our inquiries on giving us more information. But I used to say that even if you would not give us information, fine. What we need to do is walk around that, get into their constituency, and make them see their constituency talking about those issues. When they see that, they feel like, oh, this is the constituency that voted me, and not someone sitting in Abuja, tweeting, or on Facebook about it. When they see their own people, they feel like they have a responsibility for them to either make some information open or quickly go on ground and start a project. But it's been the same strategy we use for the federal government, although we don't focus on the federal government anymore, we focus on the state. So largely, it's us doing the community mobilization, which is a key part of what Follow the Money does, while expecting that the Fiscal Responsibility Act would make some of this states' government become open, not necessarily until when we ask, but they can also be proactive about some of these disclosures. I think that will be a game changer for us working in the states.
You mentioned Kaduna. Why do you feel that Kaduna State has been somewhat more responsive than some of the other states, though?
Yeah, well, I'm not from Kaduna, so so people should not think, oh, maybe. But these are facts. These are not something based on sentiments. Even before Kaduna State wrote a letter of intent to join the Open Government Partnership, he started implementing the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Their budgets has been online for people to see. The spendings of the government, also it's online as well. And I do say that even if Follow the Money did not track the 4 campaigns in Kaduna State, those education facilities perhaps might have been constructed. So, and we use Kaduna State beside some of the other states we've worked in as well. But, Kaduna State still stand out, perhaps because of the governor who they have. But,
Thank you. Debbie, you provided a lot of context for how countries and international actors like the US, the UK, Canada, Switzerland, and others have been cooperating with the Nigerian government and sometimes exceeding the Nigerian government's efforts to bring some public officials to account for acts of corruption that they've committed. That said, a lot of these actions that you've highlighted are somewhat reactive to the corruption that's been happening in Nigeria and other places. Do you think that there are avenues where the international community can be more proactive in trying to prevent corruption or strengthening systems to assist before the money is looted to begin with?
No. It's like, can you stop the bank robbery? No, because it's not illegal till they rob the bank. Yeah, I mean, there are, by enforcing the current laws, right? By getting banks, I mean, most of the money, when you're talking grand corruption, I'm not looking at somebody who stole a few $100,000. I'm looking at people that stole hundreds of millions of dollars. And to steal hundreds of millions of dollars, there is a network. So there is a banking system. It was very interesting, but when Ukraine fell, when Yanukovych fled, I went out, I met with all of the banks, just myself, the FBI team working Ukraine, and the bank said, look, in the 4 months leading up to Yanukovych leaving Ukraine, there was a mass exodus of money leaving Ukraine. So at that point, the same thing could be said for Nigeria. We know that prior to President Buhari taking off, there were like 2,000 private jets taking off out of Nigeria. Well, you know, where do they file flight plans? Where are they going? Are they landing in the UAE? Until President Buhari took office, though, no one was going to be reaching out to the UAE to say, hey, all of our kleptocrats are offshoring our money there. Could you help us now? So most of law enforcement is reactive because until the money is stolen, embezzled, or otherwise taken, it's not illegal. However, Nigeria has the new Nigerian Extractives Industry Transparency Act. It has the Advanced Free Fraud and Other Fraudulent Related Offenses Act. So, I mean, there are great laws on the books. It is having the people that are, the EFCC has brought all these recent cases. Again, that is reactive versus proactive. But if your financial institutions enforcing the laws that you have. If every government official in Nigeria is supposed to have a financial disclosure, make them fill it out, or you don't take office. 2, any false statement, materially false statement on that is automatically removal from office. I mean, there are things you could do that would say, if we find out that you did not claim your full assets, or if they're hidden in the name of a family member or your mistress or your son-in-law, you will automatically be removed from office. No ifs, no ands, no buts, no discussion. These are the rules. Then, I mean, that is an aggressive, assertive approach to fighting corruption in a country. It can be done. Unfortunately, I mean, I used to describe Buhari as a good man standing on a pillar in the water being circled by sharks. Because he's a good man. He is trying to fight corruption, but everyone around him is not supporting his cause. I had the benefit of teaching how to fight corruption to the EFCC and police officers in Nigeria. And I was in Abuja, and I said, explain to me, you get a case today, what's the very first thing you do? And they're like, oh, we send them a letter, and we let them know that they're a target of an investigation, and then we arrange for 2 weeks later for them to come in and talk to us. I go, so you give them a heads up that they're being investigated, you give them an opportunity to get rid of evidence, and then you give them an opportunity to provide fake documentation. Excellent. I mean, if you know anything about the FBI, I don't talk to you till I know everything about you. And if you better believe, if I'm asking you a question, I already know the answer to it. And that, you know, after a week of trying to train people on how to be covert, how to do surveillance, how to build a source network and all these things, I said, if you leave with nothing else after listening to me for a week, leave with this. Covert, 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 overt. You know, your guy shouldn't know he's being looked at until you're ready to arrest him. And but it's those simple kinds of things that are a logical, progressive investigation, holding your agencies that fight corruption to task, making your banks. I work corruption in South Sudan now. And so one of the things we did is we went to the U.S. banks that are correspondents to South Sudanese banks and said, look, we don't want you to de-risk them because the good people of South Sudan need to bank. But we do want you to know your customer's customer. And if millions of dollars are leaving South Sudan, they're leaving in U.S. dollars, and if they're circuiting through U.S. banks, you go back to those banks and say, if you still want to bank in U.S. dollars, here's the rule. You know, you want to bank at Citibank, you want to bank at Bank of America, here's what we require of the banks that bank with us. And make that's for U.S. dollars. Do the same for euros and everything else. Make the people who are the gatekeepers keep the gate.
Thank you. Do we have questions from the audience? So we'll do 3 at a time. You can start in the front.
Tom Timberg, consultant. I spent 5 years working in Nigeria, but I was there were some interesting things that both of you said I'd like a little bit more detail on. You talked about Kaduna State. You talked about, is it not on? Just close to your mouth. It says it's on. Yes. Okay. You talked about Kaduna State. We also hear a fair amount about a success, a lot of articles in The Economist, et cetera, about the succession of governors in Lagos State, which is obviously physically probably more significant. And then there have been some things about the influence of the new emir in Kano on the Kano state. So if you could comment on those states, that would be useful. The other thing is, the Swiss, when they gave back their Abacha money, which was several hundred million, did insist on a study of how the money was used, and they collaborated with a lot of Nigerian NGOs. The report was very interesting. That money, 80% of it probably got back to where it was supposed to, which I think in the world probably is okay. But I don't understand why other people haven't insisted, or at least haven't been able. It's obviously, it takes two to tango, or haven't been able to insist that there be similar monitoring on the returns of large sums of money. I mean, small amounts that probably is not worth it for the overhead involved. Thank you.
Let's go to the back.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Goswell. I'm from Nigeria. I'm the founder of the Center for Social Awareness, Advocacy and Ethics, a youth-led organization that is fighting corruption and promoting transparent leadership in Africa. And I want to thank you for the good work you have done trying to recover money for Nigeria. And you just said one thing that I think he also said it right away, is when the money comes back, we want to know where the money has gone to. And that is why people are angry with Buhari, and that is why he's going out next year. Because we get in the paper every day that this amount of money has been recovered, that this criminal has been arrested, but we don't see the money anywhere being used to better the life of the people. And so people think it's a fraud, that they are just writing something on paper. We can't touch it, we can't feel it. So if there's a way you guys can work with him to let us know where the money he recovered from Decaying and all these other guys have gone to improve the life of the people, that would be nice. And so that's a good thing to do, and that's the anger of Nigerians. And also, he's also arresting people selectively. People that are working with him are very, very corrupt. Some of them I know personally are very corrupt, but he's not going after them. So he's going after his opponents that are corrupt, but people in his cabinet are very corrupt. People like Amechi and the rest of them are very corrupt human beings. Nobody has ever touched them. So if he goes after them too, he will come back next year. If he doesn't, he will leave, because the people are very angry at him. No matter how good a person he is, his people around him are not doing anything. And then the final thing I want to say goes to Olu. Very good work you're doing in Nigeria. I'm a Nigerian. Corruption is cultural in Nigeria. It's a culture. And no matter how hard you try to fight it from top bottom, if you arrest all the corrupt politicians in Nigeria, put them in jail, the guys in college will take over and start stealing the money. If you get the money from one corrupt politician, another corrupt person will take the money from that person.
Thank you for your comment.
So can you include education as part of what NED would support? Educating young people on the value, on ethics and other things, so that they will know how bad corruption is. Otherwise, we will just continue to fight corruption, react, and not be proactive. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more question. If you can go to the gentleman over there.
Good day, everyone. My name is Mayo Akimade. I'm a Nigerian American studying international affairs at George Washington University. I'm grateful for the speech both of you gave today. My question pertains to party politics in Nigeria. I mean, I know you've talked about the state government, but however, in states like Lagos State, where we know people like Bola Tinubu, the ex-governor of Lagos State, controls pretty much is Lagos State himself. My question for you, for both of you, is how can the solutions you talked about help, what's it called? Help solve the party politics problems in Nigeria, because there's no denying that although we talked about the governors you've mentioned, there are people behind the scenes that control the governors. These are the people the governors report to. So my question is, are there any solutions in ousting people like this to make sure that although the governors leave, things like this in the long run don't keep happening? Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your questions. So I will leave it open to Olu and Debbie to respond. We had first the question on performance in Lagos State and the Emir of Kano, then some discussions about, honestly, where has the money been going when it's been returned to Nigeria under the current administration, and how can accountability on that front be strengthened, as well as whether or not some of the investigations and arrests are selective. Is there the perception, whether true or not, that people are being investigated because of their party affiliation or otherwise? And the final question would be on party politics and corruption within the parties themselves.
Yeah, thank you, Tilburg, for that question. Yeah, I mean, I was mentioning Kaduna as an example. There are actually other states, but yeah, perhaps they might not have opened their budgets, but they're actually doing well. You cannot take that from Lagos State, which has a larger percentage of internally generated revenue. And I mean, the economics of Nigeria cannot be taken away from Lagos State. And that's what Bola Tinubu has done in, I mean, the succession, how he has actually brought the succession of some great people. I'm not talking for these people, but I'm talking about what has been happening on ground. And also that Lagos State is being used by every other state as a yardstick for what they can do. If any state is going to the federal government for cases on why the federal government must increase resources, they take Lagos State as an example. Like, if you have more money, if we are able to have more money, we could do more. So, I mean, it's a huge case, and I think you can also relate that to how Buhari got into power, because Bola Tinubu was the one who was behind APC then. The influence of Sanusi, great. As an emir, I mean, he's been a very controversial person, even in the last dispensation when he was the CBN governor. And he mentioned some things like you need to cut out 40% of workforce working in the FG. He isn't lying, because even the present government is tilting towards that. I call it a monster, that you put a whole lot of money that you cannot account for in your GDP. So these two people are actually great influencers. I mentioned Kaduna because, yeah, I mean, is leading, and also that Kano State is the second state that has written a letter of intent to join the Open Government Partnership. Perhaps, maybe the emir might make the Kano State government to become open. I'm not sure of, because they've rejected several of our Freedom of Information letters. And also Lagos might follow suit. So they follow. Dr. Godswill, yeah, corruption is deep-seated in the veins of everyone. But we need to be able to reduce that. We need to start from somewhere. And I mentioned it as one of my recommendations, citizen education. This is the values democracy brings itself. And we must be able, and I mean, because the quality of education in Nigeria has actually went down south for some years now, it will be difficult, but it could be something that could be started. When we do community engagement, we are doing all this kind of education for the community. And I mean, it's not something one person could do, but I mean, you need a whole lot of people talking to people. I talk to people in my family, you talk to people in your family. Like something as simple as you don't give people bribe, or you don't give the police bribe, but you know it's the most difficult thing to do. Do I want to stay in the traffic or on the road for 2 hours and the police leaves me there because I've not given him 20 naira or so? But we need strong people who will stand against that and say, come on, take me to the police station. I've seen several people do that. So, I mean, I quite agree with you that citizen education is far very, very, very important. Party politics. I actually do not want to comment on any political party in my presentation. But I mean, the truth is that political parties, they are the most important in this discussion of corruption. When you get a very good person, for instance, the case of Kaduna State, you have a strong man who says, oh, we don't want to go this way, we want to be open. I'm not saying it's all that, but what we've seen. So I'm not sure I'll be able to answer the question of how do we oust the political party in Lagos, which was started by Bola Tinubu, who are the people that, I mean, you could attribute that, oh, Bola Tinubu also fed from the state itself. I mean, if you're collecting huge amounts of money like this, it means you're ripping off taxpayers as well. But also, I mean, one can conclude also, because, yeah, they might be into some other businesses as well. Currently in Nigeria, there's 68 political parties, which you might think it's an alternative, that we have other political parties. But yes, if you feel a political party is not doing well, the space is large, but I can tell you it's going to take a longer years for some political parties to come up. But I mean, it gives chance for new movements to come up. And if the youths and all could put their heads together and start a movement, perhaps if it is about ousting a political party, yeah, it might be possible in the near future by bringing together more people and all. Yeah, thank you. I leave it to.
I'll be quick. There are things that can be done that, as to the transparency of the disbursement. There are things that could be done as to the transparency of funds being returned to a country. And what it comes down to, and it's a very difficult discussion between the U.S. State Department or any other State Department and the host government, in this case, Nigeria. So the United States comes to the table and says, okay, we have $480 million of Abacha's money that has already been forfeited, and we would like to return it in a way that there is a great transparency. You will have the host country go, we're a sovereign nation, give us our money back. And we're like, yeah, finders, keepers, losers, weepers. You know, it took the United States 7 years to find it, get it back. We would like to see that the people of Nigeria benefit from this. So yes, there are actions that the host or victim government, victim meaning that the money was stolen from that government, could take. For example, of the $480 million that is currently attempting to be returned to Nigeria, you know, how much of that could be given to Doctors Without Borders, where it's like, okay, you know what, for $1 million, we are able to buy 60,000 doses of vaccine for the following things. And the rules could be that, okay, Doctors Without Borders, you have to work with Nigerian doctors and Nigerian villages and account for every vaccine. Boom, there's $1 million out of $480 million. As Olu said, $540,000 makes 190 wells. Okay, so $500,000 goes to wells. And for every single one, Nigerian labor has to be used, Nigerian people have to be employed, a Nigerian engineer has to be on the project, and you get paid at the end of every day. Not a lump sum, at the end of every day. You work today, you got paid. And each person is responsible for accounting for the amount of money that it costs to build that one well, and all 190 wells have to be built. So it can be done, but it's, I mean, whether it's few distribution, building projects where, again, so that the benefit, and then once a month, put it on the front of the Daily Ledger or the Nigerian newspapers that said, $1 million was given, part of the $480 million returned to Nigeria was used to buy $1 million worth of vaccines. And children, and this is how many children have been vaccinated with these funds. So account for it. But that's where you get back to the accountability of the host government. They have to want to have the transparency to show that, we're going to account for every penny of the $480 million that was returned to us. And that takes the obligation of, I know from working in South Sudan, people are like, well, if I don't give them a contract, I'll be killed. I mean, they're threatened to award contracts to certain people. So there has to be that political will that says coming out, we're going to be incredibly transparent, and this is what we're going to do. But like Matt Damon's organization, water.org, okay, well, if we work, will the Nigerian government work with water.org to make sure that clean water, but the stipulation is to benefit the people of Nigeria. Not only are the wells being built in Nigeria, but Nigerian labor, Nigerian engineers, and Nigerian people have to be employed so they're not only benefiting from the well, but benefiting from the work and the opportunity. So things can be done. It comes back down to political will and the desire for transparency.
Thank you. Let's take another round of questions. We can start in the front again. The gentleman right here.
Your final quote from Andy Steigman, Georgetown University. Your final quote from Chinua Achebe brought up another topic. He wrote a wonderful novel 50 years ago, No Longer at Ease, in which he explored the problem of petty corruption in Nigeria. To what extent does the prevalence of petty corruption, in effect, give cover and encouragement to those who steal larger amounts?
Mike Jajic. I teach in the Peace Operations program at George Mason University. I'd like to refer to your second slide where you talked about combating impunity and use an example from recent peace operations with the use of hybrid courts to attack that problem. The most successful example has been the Commission to Combat Impunity in Guatemala, which resulted in the impeachment of the president, Otto Perez Molina, and then it was adopted, that use of hybrid courts, next door in Honduras, which was not a place that had a peace operations. So my question is, would the use of hybrid courts involving both local, carefully vetted and protected local judges and prosecutors, along with international judges and prosecutors, as a way of perhaps countering the culture of corruption that exists? But would that be something that would work? Has it been suggested? And if it were an initiative that you think is potentially successful, how would you go about trying to implement that?
Hi, my name is Jeff Myers. I'm with a private company, REI Systems. We actually initiated and created both usaspending.gov and data.gov here in the U.S., which are transparency frameworks. We also support the U.S. General Services Administration in procurement activities. And all of these things I think are good, both here and in Nigeria. And I think, with all due respect, I greatly value the work you've described, Ms. Pravat, but what worries me is it's all trying to kind of combat the problem after the horse has gotten out of the barn. And that we may not be attacking it early enough by trying to both inhibit people from becoming corrupt and as well prevent them as they steal the money. And in most major corporations in the United States, there's a fairly simple structure I'll describe at a very high level. And my question will be, could this not be implemented in Nigeria? And if so, is it possible for the NGOs and the development institutions to help encourage or require it? And just very simply, in four major parts, typically political leadership says what we want to do. And then you have a person who, let's call them the program manager, who says, I will decide how. You have a procurement official who says, I will select the vendor or the employee or whomever, and then you have an accounts payable manager who says, yep, we got it, and we're going to make payment. And typically those sorts of structures, again, across many companies and across many governments, that separation of responsibilities and the distinction of the civil service person who's going to carry out the work and the political person who presumably has the most power but doesn't get the purse strings, it works. And it works not perfectly, but fairly well. So the question again is that possible in Nigeria? Is it something where encouragement or assistance from the international organizations might make that work better?
Catherine Marshall from Georgetown University. I'm well aware that the religious scene in Nigeria is extraordinarily complex and dynamic, and I'm also aware that the State Department in the previous administration had some initiatives to try to engage religious leaders systematically on the corruption issue. I wondered if you could comment on that.
Okay, Olu, would you like to take a crack?
Yeah, I'm going to take it quick. So I'm going to take it anti-clockwise. Religion. I didn't want to talk about religion as well. But I mean, citizens, the massive followership for religions in Nigeria, whether it's Islam, Christianity, or the other ones, I want to comment less on using that strategy as much as possible, but I mean, we've not actually seen that strategy. Maybe it might be something worth trying, but I think my proposal will be for CSOs to start building their own religion, if that's possible, which is mass mobilization based on citizen education. Jeff, what you say is very needed, and this is one of the commitments to the Open Government Partnership in terms of open contracting, where you, if I'm right with what you're trying to explain, where you have the open contracting standard. So the politician is not part of procurement at all. This present government has actually done well in that, and I think 2 weeks ago they launched the National Open Contracting platform called NOCOPO, which, yeah, we've been in talk about it for the past 2 years, but they just launched it. Yeah, whether it will work well is what we're looking at. But I mean, they promised, they fulfilled that, and it's online presently in terms of procurement. And also that the Fiscal Responsibility Act allows every state to make their procurement open as well, but they've not implemented that. But we will see. We will see what will happen with this in place. Impunity. There's been several discussions recently in the National Assembly about having another court outside of the main court for responding to anti-corruption cases, which I'm not sure if it has been brought forward, but there are discussions around it. But having the international perspective, so like The Hague, having courts like in The Hague to make judgments on some of this, I think it's a good initiative. But yeah, it's a very good initiative if you could have international court for that. I think it's not part of the Open Government Partnership or so, but I think it's going to be a nice one. Petty corruption doesn't make the headline like the big £100 million that takes, well, that still takes like 3 years or 4 years before you know, oh, it's a huge amount. So, but it really doesn't make the headline? And how will it make the headline when you don't even have the data or you don't have the information? So it is when we start having the information on, oh, okay, this is the amount that this state government is going to spend, small amounts to be spent in providing water facility. When we have such data, that's when maybe you would have journalists, investigative journalists bringing it in the fore. But presently, it doesn't really come on the headline, just like you would see the big ones.
Debbie, would you like to add your comments?
Sure. From a religious standpoint, I can only tell you, unfortunately, as a former law enforcement officer, the only time the religion factors into my case is when charities were being used to launder money. So, whatever, I mean, and it happened, like Hezbollah, all of the charities in Herndon, Virginia that were used after 9/11 to launder terrorism financing. So unfortunately, when it comes on my radar, it's for usually a negative reason, and it's because good works are being, unfortunately, sometimes used as a mechanism to launder money. Whether petty corruption leads to grand corruption or grand corruption results in petty corruption, I mean, it ultimately comes down to an atmosphere of, and it comes down to power corrupts at any level. So, I mean, I'm in Bangladesh, fighting corruption in Bangladesh for 5 years. And I'm with the military police who are the investigators. And they get out in traffic, stop traffic to let their car through. And I'm looking, I'm like, do you understand? Right now you are abusing your power because you feel that you have the right to get through the traffic more than the guy behind you. And that is abuse of power. In the FBI, we used to like say, no, you cannot go into a deli and go, I want more, flash your badge and go, I want more roast beef. No, that is an abuse of your power. And so at every single stage, people think that the little bit of power they have can be utilized for personal gain. And I think a lot of times it has more to do with the incredible level of poverty. For example, Bangladesh, the average person lives on $1.90 per day. And so when you are subsistence living, if anything you can do is going to get your family a little bit more money and a little bit more food, you have the ability to extort that from someone else, they do. And so it's more of a overall pervasive atmosphere, but a lot of it, I mean, it's because the police officers aren't paid very much, and therefore the only way they can get ahead is by taking a bribe, which is unfortunate and awful, but that's how they justify it. I'm 100% a supporter of having international tribunals and having international investigators, like getting a task force together from U.S., UK, Nigerian, embedded with the EFCC in Nigeria to bring cases forward and to bring them before judges that have no vested interest but are impartial and therefore less likely to be bribed. And therefore, the evidence isn't going to disappear. The case isn't going to squander. When I was in Bangladesh, I testified in Bangladesh court for the government of Bangladesh. And the judge I testified before died of a heart attack. I hope it was a heart attack. And the judge who replaced him flew to London, met with the subject, came back and acquitted him, not of the charges he was charged with, but other charges, and then resigned from the bench and fled to Malaysia. But there's a point. So I go to Malaysia going, I want to find out about this judge. And Malaysia's like, we're not going to help you. So, I mean, it's facilitators. It's people who are, the other enablers who are allowing it. But by bringing in some impartial people, which a lot of people resent, like, America, we don't need your help, or UK or Canada, whatever. I'm like, but we are willing to come in and we are willing to assist you. And you know what? I don't have a vested interest other than beyond justice. So I'm not going to be bribed. I'm not going to be intimidated. And things could move more quickly. Have a rocket docket. You're indicted 30 days later, you're going to court, boom. And you have to have your ducks in a row. You have to have your facts and your evidence. It's impartial. So I'm a huge advocate of having impartial, especially from other African nations. So it's not United States doing all this. No, I'm bringing somebody in from South Africa, I'm bringing somebody in from Botswana, and I'm bringing somebody in from Tanzania and saying, you're our international tribunal. And I think that's it.
So I think we'll do 2 more very quick questions. Please try to keep them to about one sentence, and then we'll let our panelists respond and also add their closing remarks. So you can go to the woman, and then the center.
Hello, my name is Petra Ferankova. I'm an intern at Global Financial Integrity and Applied Economics student at George Washington. And if you could please comment on what extent you think the corruption in Nigeria is done through trade misinvoicing and underreporting of exports and imports, and how that could be improved.
Thank you. Richard America, also at Georgetown University in the Business School, where we have a project to develop a network of business ethics centers at business schools in Africa, especially in Nigeria. And we're hoping that training managers, decision makers, at the professional level will have a long-term impact. It might be a naive hope, but business ethics education is a strength at Georgetown and at many other business schools, and we think that this can happen in Africa. And we would like NED to take a look at our proposal. So this is a pitch as well as a question.
And then we can take the one last question right next time.
My name is Maria Matira from Mali, and I am the founder of Baobab Learning Center, a program that's working in Mali based on education for children and community development. So I know the corruption is an issue in Nigeria, but I would say that Nigeria is behind Mali in terms of corruption. So I really wanted to be connected to any organization that's working currently in Mali issue, because I'm trying to make African diaspora together, and we start a committee to work and issue as education and corruption advocacy. So I would like to know who's working on Mali case, and I want to be connected to that person or that institution. Thank you.
Sure, and so the members of the Africa team are happy to chat with you after this about our programs in Mali and also Nigeria. But I will allow Olu and Debbie to provide their responses to these questions and any closing remarks that they might have.
Business, the very important part, because politicians can actually not take out some funds without private entities. And I do tell businessmen also that, come see, we are actually the one making this government to become corrupt, steal money and all, because in procurement, you do sign pacts with them. So why can't you go to them and have your moral values in your pocket than going to them and you seal a deal and you say, oh, there's a payback from contracts. I think the business community is very important and could be a very good way as well. Reporting illicit financial flows, if I got that question right, through trade and the rest. Yeah, I think recently there's been networks of investigative journalism going around, especially ICFJ has been doing some things with some country journalists, like Premium Times reporters, and a whole lot of them in connecting, in using, putting some of this in the headline. But I think it's still in infancy, but I know there's actually an international network. Final remarks, I would want to state this, that between 1999 and now, there's actually been little progress on tackling corruption. In fact, a whole lot has been done by this administration. Not like that's where we want to be, but it has signed several several laws that could make agencies become more transparent. And I think that should be a takeaway, and that the issue of corruption in Nigeria is cultural. We need to step up lots of education and do more to mobilize citizens to also be able to know that, oh, this politician is actually taking, it is your own money. It is taxpayers' money they are spending. So you need to request and ask them that, oh man, what have you done with my money?
Thank you, Olu. Debbie?
I just think it comes back down, even in business, to transparency. And so import-export is one of like 20 ways people steal money. And whether it's fake invoicing or overestimating the export or the import, or in taxation or avoiding taxation, it comes down to, I mean, people know what's right and wrong, and it's what can you do and get away with? And so what you have to eliminate is, I can't get away with it. And that is through transparency, through civil society, through NGOs, from the very top down, saying that every penny will be accounted for. I'm a big advocate of bringing in professional accounting firms who, again, they're disinterested third parties who will come in and say, look, I'm just looking at your books, and finding the discrepancies and realizing that they're going to be public. This isn't a private report, it's going to be a public report. And if we find discrepancies in transactions, they are going to be made public. And if you're not doing anything wrong, that shouldn't be a problem. And especially when it's state funds or government funds. So in business school, I would recommend that everybody realizes that it is the accountability to your customer, to your government, to your people, and that the only way to eliminate and try to minimize beforehand, before the corruption is done, is that you go into it knowing that there's full transparency and accountability for every penny.
Thank you very much. I'd like us all to offer a warm round of applause to our panelists today. I think that they had a lot of insightful comments in their presentations and recommendations, and I hope we can continue this conversation in the near future. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.